Stress-free learning with
Inonyam.
create a better tomorrow. You get the program. Hard work pays off, so come and put it in. No need to wait, let the lessons begin.
If you are not sweating, you're not doing anything. You gotta push harder. Gotta work harder. Gotta see that drip of sweat come down your face. Okay, boom. Okay, today what are we doing? Today what we're doing is the remainder and factor theorem, right? Those will be the two things that we'll be doing today. So, what is the remainder theorem, you ask? The remainder theorem is not something complex. It's something pretty straightforward actually. So, let me show you what I mean. First, the definition says, if a polynomial f of x is divided by a linear equation like ax plus b, then it's saying the remainder is equal to f of, or is equal to g of negative b over a, or f of negative b over a, right? So what does that mean? Of course, it's hard to understand that when I'm just talking. So let me start writing to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so example 1. This is the first example 1 on the remainder theorem. So example 1 would be, so my example 1, let's say g of x is equal to 2x to the power of 4 plus 12x cubed plus 3, right? Determine the remainder. So now I want to say determine the remainder if g of x is divided by 3x plus 6, right? So what does this mean, right? So what was I saying above earlier? I was saying that what's the formula for remainder? The formula for remainder basically is the remainder is equal to g of negative b over a, right? B over a, you're asking what is b and a, right? B and a are in the form of an equation, a linear equations like ax plus b, right? That's the equation right there, right? So when it says g of negative b over a, what it's simply saying is we equating that equation to 0. So it'll be, if you take this b onto the other side, it becomes negative b. To get x on its own, we have to divide by a. So now once we have done that, that's how we get to g remainder is equal to g of negative b over a, right? So now we have that. Once we have that, now let's work out what we want to work out, right? So what do we want to work out? We want to work out what? The remainder of 2x to the power of 4 plus 12x cubed plus 3, which is g of x, right? So now how do we get there? So what's the first step? First step is to find what's inside g, right? So what's inside g? What would that be equal to? It will be equal to negative 6 over 2 over 3, right? Which is equal to negative 2. Why? Because I might as well say 3x plus 6 is equal to 0 and then solve for x. That's basically what that is, right? So now to find the remainder, it will be g of negative 2, so which is equal to. So now what do? I just substitute negative 2 wherever I see an x, because g of something, g of whatever function of, it's a function of x. So let me substitute what g is. Let me substitute what g is. What is g? Let me substitute what x is. So it will be negative 2 to the power of 4 plus 12 to the negative 2 to the power of 3 plus 3, right? So now what do? Now I just put this into the calculator and I will find what the final answer is. So what is the final answer? If I put this in the calculator, my result is negative 61. So remainder is equal to negative 61, right? So that's basically the remainder theorem. So let's look at the factor theorem. Let me write it here. factor theorem, right? Then this is remainder right? So the factor theorem, what is the factor theorem all about? The factor theorem is if f of x is a Stop being lazy. It's as simple as that. You can't want to get the great things in life like passing a trick while you are being lazy. That's just impossible. You have to work. The polynomial, right? And ax plus b is a factor of f, right? So if f is a factor of ax plus b, right? The odds that f of that factor is equal to 0. So what am I saying? Basically, what I'm saying is if f of x factor is ax plus b, then f of negative b over a is equal to 0. So basically, that's what the factor theorem is saying. That's basically the essence of the factor theorem. Essence, you should write that word down, use it in your essay. So anyway, so now let's do an example, right? So that we understand what I'm talking about. So we are saying the example says if example 1, if f of x is a polynomial, sorry, cuts. So we say if 2x plus 1 is a factor of g of x, which is equal to 2x cubed minus d of x squared minus 3 over 4. That's my polynomial right here, right? Now the question says calculate what d is. So you're probably wondering, what do you mean calculate d? It seems weird, doesn't it? No, it doesn't, because that's d over there in the equation. There's a d over there. You might not even have noticed that. There's a d in the equation. So we want to calculate what the value of d is. So what is our process? What do we do? Right? So what do we do? So since we know that we're working under a factor theorem, right? We know that at some point we're going to need this to be equated to 0, right? But in your exam, you might not know that. So you have to be aware of this so that you know when to use the factor theorem rules. So what do I do now, right? Since they say it's a factor, right? So I find out what negative b over a is, or otherwise solve this equation for x is equal to 0, right? So this would be equal to negative 1 over 2. Why? Because it's what is it called? It's b, negative b over a. Negative b is 1 over a, which is 2. That's how I ended up with negative half, right? So now what do? I substitute this as it says here. So this is how it should look, right? Since they said it's a factor, this rule applies, right? So what do? Let me factor it in, right? So I'll say f of negative half is equal to 0. I already know, they told me it's a factor, so I know it's going to equal to 0. It's equal to, what is also equal to? It's equal to 2, and then I put in negative half over here, cubed minus d minus squared minus 3 over 4, right? So this is what my equation looks like. How many unknowns do I have in my equation? Only one, right? The only unknown I have is d. So can I find what the answer is? Of course I can. This is straightforward now. This is a free mark right about here. So if you can get here, you can practically get all the marks if you don't make a dumb mistake, right? If you stay concentrated and you focus, right? So what is my step for solving for this, right? My step is if I find the cube of half, negative half, and I add it to the negative 3 over 4, right? And then I'll take it onto the other side. Then I'll just divide by the square of negative half, right? So what will I have? I have 0 is equal to negative d negative half squared minus 1. Because if I put this plus that, it will give me negative 1, right? So I take it onto the other side. 1 is equal to negative d. 1 is equal to, sorry. If I take this onto the other side, it becomes positive. Focus. 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 Focus, man. It becomes positive. But if I divide it by negative d, by the negative from the d, it becomes negative 1 on this side, right? And then now I have d half d to the power of the d 1/4, right? Why is it d 1/4? Because if you square negative half, it gives me 1/4. So therefore d is equal to negative 4. So my final answer to find what they were asking for, which is they were asking for calculate d, right? Since they say calculate for d, that is my final answer. But if you don't trust that this is right, that I did it wrong maybe, just plug it in and see for yourself, see what result you get. And also you can use that as a method of testing if you have done it right when you're doing your exam. Okay, so since we're done with that, now we'll be looking at factorization of cubic polynomials, right? So we'll be using these things here to factorize polynomials, right? Okay, so factorization of cubic functions. There are two methods of factorizing cubic functions. The first method is by inspection. Inspection, for me, I really don't like that method. So I will not teach you what that method is, because I don't think that method is necessary, right? So the method that will always work, no matter what happens, no matter what situation, is synthetic division, which is method 2, right? So let's look at method 2, synthetic division. But if you really want to know the method of inspection, you can go check it out. It will be in your textbooks. Whichever textbook that you use, you will have it in the book. It will give you both methods. So let's look at synthetic division. Okay, so synthetic division. Okay, so my equation is 2x cubed plus 10x squared plus x minus 13 is equal to 0. Solve for x. That's what I say, solve for x, right? No, this is not your trinomial. So you can't use the normal way that you normally solve a trinomial. Okay? So what do you do now? What do you do? You are stuck at a bit of a problem, right? A bit of a conundrum, one might say. Right? So what I'll do is, first of all, I have to find what factor goes into this that will make it equal to 0. So that I know that that factor is one of the factors, because there should be 3x values, right? That factor will be one of your 3x values, right? So if I do, the only way that I know that you can find a factor here is by try and error. Most of the time, the number is not bigger than 3. It's normally 1, 2, or -1, -2, or 3 maybe at sometimes. So what do I do? Let me start with 1. Let me try 1 first, okay? So when I try 1, I do end up getting a 0, right? So when I try 1, I get 0. So that means that it's a factor. If I put 1 into this and it equates to 0, it means that that is a factor. So my factor x is equal to 1. But another way of writing it is, I won't write it like this. I'll write it how you normally see it. X minus 1. Because my 1 is positive. And you know when I change this, it becomes negative b over a, right? So, or x minus 1 is equal to 0. X will become positive. So I write it in the sense of it's a negative, and then when it changes, when it's multiplied by the negative b, it becomes positive. So my factor is actually 1, right? If I solve for it. So, but I'll keep it like this, x minus 1, right? So now that I have a factor, right, what do? Let me draw a graph. First of all, before I draw the graph, let me just label out let me write these numbers out. The coefficients of all your x's. So x cubed, x squared, x, coefficient, write all those and write the constant. So I have 10, I have 2, 10, 1, and negative 13, right? If, for example, let's say it went from 2 cubed to x, there was no x squared, I would make sure that I write a 0. If I do not write a 0 there, my answer will be wrong. So if, let's say, for example, we have 2x cubed plus 10x squared minus 13, there's no x. I have to write a 0 where the x is supposed to be. So it's supposed to rise in exponent. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there has to be, every position must be held by a variable.
Stop binge watching all of these series and start doing something useful. Because if you add up all that time you spend watching some nonsense, that's a whole lot of wasted time that you could have used on something more useful. Learn a new language at that. Study. That's one of them, right? So yeah, stop watching series and wasting all that time and use that time in a more useful way.
By a number. So if there isn't anything, write a 0. Don't forget that is very important, because your answer will be very different if you do not write that 0. So let's get started. Okay, let me draw something. Draw vertical lines going down and the horizontal line across like that, right? So what do? You also need one just before at the beginning right here. So what do? I put my factor out just before the 2, right? In a box before the 2. My factor, sorry. And my factor is not -1, it's 1. So I'll write 1 here, because again, what? How do you convert that? It becomes negative b over a, it becomes 1, positive 1. And then I put a 0 here. There's always going to be a 0 there. No matter what happens, no matter what equation you're doing, make sure you put a 0 there at the start of it all. Over here, it's the factor that you have, right? So now, what do? I add vertically down. So 2 plus 0, that's 2, right? When I add vertically down, now I have this number here. So I multiply by the factor. So it will be 2 times 1, which gives me 2, and I write it in that box there, right? So now I have 10 and 2. So I add vertically down, right? So 10 plus 2, 12. And then I multiply with the factor. So it will be 12 times 1. And then when I multiply 12 times 1 again, 12, right? So what do again at this point? I add vertically down. So 1 plus 12 is 13. And then I multiply with the factor. So 1 times 13 gives me 13. And if I say negative 13 plus 13 gives me 0. And if your equation for some reason does not give you 0 at the end, that means you did something wrong. You might have left out, let's say for example, that 0 that I was talking about earlier. So make sure you get a 0 at the end. That's the only way to know that you did it right. So now once you have that, right, you're almost there, right? So what do? When you have this, now you write it out as now, because you've lost a power, because now there's only 1, 2, 3. There's only 3 numbers here. So you have lost 1 power. So whatever you start with, you have to start with 1 power less than the highest one, which would be not x cubed, x squared. So it will be 2x squared. So it runs from the coefficient of the last one is next to the biggest power, right? So this will be 2x squared plus 12x plus 13 is equal to 0, right? So since we have this now, make sure whatever sign that these things come with, you have to write them here. So if this was -2, this would be -2x squared, right? So now we have this. Now what do? Now we know how to solve this. This is a trinomial. We already know. We're already aware of how to solve this, right? So I'm not going to bother showing you the process, because you can either put this in your calculator if you have a silver calculator, or you can just use the quadratic formula, which again you should know. But let me just write it on the side. That would be negative b square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, right? That's what the quadratic formula is, right? You should know this. You should commit this to memory, right? So now once I have that, I'll use that to apply to get my answers, right? So now let me write it out. Oh, sorry about this. I forgot I erased this by mistake. Plus 12x plus 13 is equal to 0. So my answer x is equal to, I'll get two values, right? My two values will be negative 1.42 or x is equal to negative 4.58. These are two values though, right? But my initial question says solve for x, and it's a cubic function, so I need to have 3x values. How come I only have 2? Right? That's my question. Why do I only have 2x values, not 3? Why? It's because I already have the other one. I solved for the other one using try and error. So the one above here, it is a factor. Because if you put it into here, it'll give you 0. If you put this into there, it'll give you 0. Or a number very close to 0. It might be 0.01 or something like that. But because these numbers are a little bit rounded off, so they won't be perfectly 0. But you need to have 3 values. So you also need to add over here on the side, oh, x is equal to positive 1. And that's basically it. That's how you would factorize a cubic function. You need to know this. This is easy, 3 marks. Synthetic division, do a couple of examples of your own, or use the examples that you already know, and get comfortable with this. Okay. Boom.